these aren't just like weird Jesus freaks. I'm like, these are godly men. Like, and that's when it clicked in my head that these are not weirdos that go to church. These men have something that I need so badly, and I don't know what it is. So later that day, I don't even remember who was teaching, did an altar call at the end of their sermon. And for the first time, I completely surrendered. I was at the lowest point in my life that like I just gave up. Like for the first time, my heart said, I quit. Like, I'm done. I give up.
When I was 11, my dad had actually preached that morning at church, and he basically just preached the gospel. Like, it was just a straight gospel message. And intellectually, I was like, I believe that. So I told him I wanted to get saved. So we prayed that prayer. It was July 6th. It's like 9 o'clock at night. It's embedded in my head. 9:52 actually is the time I stopped praying.
Okay.
But that whole experience was very intellectual in nature. It was just about what I knew. When I was 16 or 17 is when the gospel became like real to me.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Mark from the Disrupted Truth. I am very excited to have some amazing people here, some very special guests. Very excited to listen and hear their story. So we got Alyssa, who is gifted and talented in many different ways. And then, of course, there's her wonderful husband, Tom, who he is the original Tommy boy. There is no other. Anyone else is just imitation. But just want to welcome you to the Disrupted Truth, where this channel exists to inspire, motivate, and connect people to God, His Word, and His people. So that's what we are here to do, is to listen to your guys' stories, and I'm excited to kind of hear them. I guess to give a little context, to kind of lead a little bit here, is just share your faith journey. How did you come to Christ? Kind of talking about that journey. I know your guys' journey is different.
Yeah.
But your paths crossed, which is really cool. So I don't know if you want to kind of speak to that a little bit. Eventually how like you guys met, or, how was your involvement, with maybe church ministry, or realistically, like, how did you guys come to know Jesus?
Sure. Yeah. So, I guess there's always a lot of detail weaved into the big picture, but big picture, I grew up in a Christian household. My parents got saved when I was like 7. They were non-practicing Catholics when they got married real young. And when I was 3 or 4, we started going to a Christian church. It was a local Baptist church, and they got saved there. My dad got quickly involved in ministry.
Okay.
And actually had become the assistant pastor. Maybe alarmingly fast, actually, looking back. But when I was like 7, they got saved, and church was life. We were there probably more often than we were home, which still working some of that out of myself now, 31 years old. But when I was 11, my dad had actually preached that morning at church, and he basically just preached the gospel. Like, it was just a straight gospel message. And intellectually, I was like, I believe that, like, I get that, I believe it. And so that night, he had a cousin that had attended service, and his cousin, I remember he had called my dad, and he said, I don't get it, Frank. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. I need you to explain it. And I remember overhearing that conversation and saying, well, I get it, So I told him I wanted to get saved. So we prayed that prayer. It was July 6th. It was like 9 o'clock at night. It's embedded in my head. 9:52 actually is the time I stopped praying.
Okay.
But that whole experience was very intellectual in nature. It was just about what I knew. When I was 16 or 17 is when the gospel became like real to me. When I really committed my life to Christ. I'd made some mistakes, and
as we all do.
Yeah, as we all do. Just I think that it was made clear to me, like, man, Jesus died for me, and I need Him. It was more of an understanding, like spiritual understanding at that point. But in the middle of all of this, what was happening in the family dynamic is it was extremely dysfunctional. That same guy that was the assistant pastor of a church was abusive at home. So it's, he could preach a sermon on Sunday morning and then come home and like basically beat my younger brother for like spilling milk or rolling his eyes or something, So confusing experience when you're watching two different things happen.
Sure.
And the only thing that you can do when you're younger and can't make sense of it is normalize it in your head. It's like, maybe this is how it is for everybody. It's just, you put on one show for the public and things are different at home and it just is what it is. But it was so wrong. And so by like 13, I had developed pretty close to a hatred of my father because I was seeing the inconsistency and the damage that it was causing the family. We went through something. We were putting an addition on the house, and he got laid off at the same time. It became a very dark time for the family. Something in him changed and never went back. So from that point on, I started seeing the way that he treated my mother and the way that he treated the rest of us. And again, just the inconsistency of it, and took issue with that. And so my response was to be outside the house as much as I could. So that's what I did. And that's where all my mistakes started happening. I prioritized, my priorities were so screwed up, it's not even funny. I really missed an opportunity to be friends with my siblings because I was so focused on pursuing my friendships out of the house to be out more. And then all that just translated to work and ministry once I became an adult. And it's crazy. In my early 20s, I learned that you can really lose God in ministry, like very quickly, and the church service just became about being busy and what I was doing, and like God was nowhere in it. And at one point I actually stepped away from everything. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense, and so that's something that I'm very conscious of now.
So how many people are in your family?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I have 3 younger siblings. My sister Sam's 28. My brother's 24, and then my youngest sister is 20.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So besides, so I could only imagine how challenging that must have been as a family. Now, are you the oldest?
I am.
Okay. So did you feel a sense to protect at all?
Yeah. Yeah, I did. That came into play. And I think to an extent, I didn't know how much. I wish that I could go back because I would have protected more. I would have spoke up more than I did. Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to certain aspects of situations that happened with me. So, all right. So you seem like what maybe would be an ideal safe environment. Because you think growing up in a Christian home that there's safety that's there, and in your situation it doesn't seem like it was very safe. How do you think that shaped some of the decisions that you made, and do you feel like that moment drew you closer to God?
That's interesting. I know we'll talk about it later, but I don't know that I actually ever felt safe till I met my husband.
Okay.
In life, his home wasn't safe, church wasn't safe, because as that progressed, that there was a lot of church hurt there too, with experiences that came in my later 20s. But it shaped a lot of my decisions, because when you don't feel safe, you make decisions totally differently.
Right.
And really, what ends up happening is if you don't ever feel safe, you just dissociate to a certain extent. And everything becomes very task oriented. You kind of take emotion out of it and just do what you have to do. Life becomes a list of obligations. And you do what you have to do to protect yourself too, to not feel the pain of not feeling safe. So definitely influenced a lot of my decisions. It's the reason that I was married to my career for the majority of my 20s. It's the reason that the relationships that I did have went totally sideways,
And what were career-wise, what were some of the things that you were doing at that time?
Yeah, I got a full-time job at a marketing agency before I graduated college. So it was that. I mean, it was sort of creative work. I ended up on the more administrative side of it. And by the time I was like 23, my goal and the owner's plan was just to sell me the company. So I was working 12, 14-hour days, and it's all that mattered. It's just all that mattered to me, working on the weekends and,
So what, during that challenging period of time, what were some of the things that helped you to kind of find peace and to find some solace from maybe not going cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs?
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote poetry and my guitar. I saved space for being creative. Writing poetry was a godsend for me because I learned a lot about myself that way. You got something going on, I can't really articulate. I've not given myself the mental space to be able to articulate it, so I started writing. And I think this really holds true today. I've never tried to write. I've never been able to sit down and I want to write a poem today. It was like, I need to write. And it almost like I wasn't even controlling the pen. It was like the Lord just, and then 2 pages later, it's like, wow, that's where my heart's at right now. That's what's going on. That's what fed into it. It was such an enlightening experience.
Yeah, one of the things that I do appreciate about artistry is, and when I meet different musicians or artists and stuff like that, I really found, especially for myself, writing songs or whatever was a really great outlet to communicate and develop my voice and what I wanted to say. And in some cases, sometimes it was actually a cry for help that people wouldn't really think or know unless I told them or what have you. So I don't know, was that kind of the same for you? Maybe not so much like a crying out for help, but just kind of that was kind of help channeling your, just trying to find that peace and that solace.
Yeah, absolutely. It was kind of a joke because I would maybe even in the last 3 years, I'd be like, oh, I wrote a song today. And he would be kind of excited, like, oh, you that's awesome that you had time to write. And I'm like, yeah, it's not happy. I typically only wrote when there was something kind of sad going on, but it was important though, because it was the only way that I could get it out. So in some ways, yeah, a little bit of a cry for help, even just to myself, hey, pay attention to your feelings,
So we kind of discussed a little bit earlier, and if you want to talk about it, that's fine. But kind of talked a little bit about church hurt because it...
could talk about it all day.
Yeah, sure, we probably could. I know, and I will throw in the disclaimer that it's not trying to speak ill of a particular ministry or what have you. It's just something that I've experienced myself, and I don't know if church leadership always recognizes the things that they say. And that doesn't mean that I'm free of not getting my feelings hurt to some degree or some aspect.
Yeah.
But church hurt is it's a legitimate thing. It's something that some people deal with, and people that haven't dealt with it, they either take the mindset of, oh, just kind of get over it, or, it's like, does that really exist? But it happens. So so you kind of had this situation with your father. Obviously there were some things that were there. Did that carry over into church ministry? And then was there a point where you're just like, you know what? I think I'm just, I'm over this. I'm done with you, God. I'm done with church. I'm done with that. Because I know for me, I kind of reached that place where I was like, God, I love you, but your body, it sucks. So I don't know if you could speak to that.
Yeah, and let me just say this: wherever you have people, there's going to be hurt because we're a bunch of imperfect people. So I mean, to some extent, in a broad sense, church hurt's probably inevitable because we, like you said, we do get our feelings hurt and things go sideways and people are imperfect. But there's a depth to it that I think isn't talked about enough. There can be a depth to it, and like systematic problems in the church. So it was later in my 20s is actually the way. I guess looking back, the church that I got saved in, that we started going to when I was younger, from 4 to 13 or so, very legalistic. So obviously that creates some cognitive distortions spiritually. But later on in my later 20s, the way that the church we were attending handled my parents' divorce, because eventually my mom hit a breaking point with my dad. And
understand, please.
And yeah, absolutely. It was. I have told her on several occasions I would have left 10 years sooner than she did. So she hung in there for a long time. But the way that the church handled that and the lack of accountability that was present for my dad's side of things was was disgraceful to me. And so there was a lot there, and the lack of accountability that I witnessed in working for the church, being as involved as I was. I mean, when you get that involved, you just see things as they are, and you can't unsee them. You can't just bury your head. So the church hurt that was there was really just like, it was the lack of accountability that I saw amongst God's people that bothered me. It wasn't the imperfection. It was a lack of accountability in it all. Because like I said, we're going to fall short. But when that's just excused and brushed over out of convenience, it's just not okay. And I really think that it does God's people a huge disservice. And I wish it was talked about more, because the leadership will have to answer for that. Like, you will have to answer for the way that you lead in the position that God put you in. And when you have, like my brother doesn't attend church right now, and I hope he does one day. I think the church serves a huge benefit. It exists for a reason, and there are wonderful things to draw from it. But when all that you know is hurt, it's kind of hard to convince somebody to go back. So, but and my brother doesn't go to church right now, and I can't even blame him from the way that all that went down. So
yeah, I mean, I took a hiatus. I was sharing with you guys, I took a break from church because it's true, when you're involved in church ministry, you get involved in church leadership, the curtain gets pulled back and you are exposed to things that just being a lay person doesn't necessarily see or sense. And, I can relate to hopefully encourage you. I'm sure your brother will find, find his way. I know that there's tons of times that I probably freaked my parents out by being in church, being out of church, being in church, being out of church. But I hope that I'm landed on my feet all right. I seem to be okay. You guys would be able to tell me whether I'm off or crazy or not. But it is unfortunate because it kind of drives a wedge in your personal daily relationship with God, because it's kind of like, I know there have been times where I was like, God, why is this going on? You know what I mean? This is supposed to be your body. It's supposed to, you do hold it to a higher standard. But it's an unfortunate thing that, church leaders don't pay that much attention to it. So, but
so there was a second part of your question too about how did this flow in the ministry that I just wanted to come back to. So in the context of ministry for me, I think in some ways it probably contributed to my own church hurt by just continuing to press in, because the example that I saw growing up was, you can live whatever life you want over here, but as long as you're plugged in and you're doing God's work, like, it balances out, and that was never verbally expressed to me, but that's the picture that I saw from my dad and some others and in life. And so I think that impacted me. And so I didn't have the healthiest coping mechanisms. The way that I dealt with all of this, I had my own addictions, my own struggles, my own problems within that. But it was like, as long as I showed up and I led worship on Sunday, as long as I was involved, as long as I read the Bible in the morning, like checked my boxes, it was all going to level out, and there was a lot of undoing that had to happen there over the last 5 or 6 years.
I didn't grow up in a church, and very, very different stories. Do you want me to start?
Yeah, we'll bounce.
Okay.
Can I say one thing on that too?
Yeah.
He'll share his story, the details of it, and in some ways I am almost envious of his story, because the radical way that the Lord saved him and the darkness that he physically felt pulled from, it made it so obvious and cut and dry, like, man, I'm living for the Lord now.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes growing up in church, you lose a piece of that. Like the radical aspect of salvation, you lose a little piece of it because it gets drowned in knowledge, And so that's just something, as wild as his story can get, it's like what the Lord's done in his life, like, so, in a good way. Jealous of it, the way that it all happened. So
it's all you, buddy.
All right. So I grew up in South Jersey, my family is all from South Philly. So we commuted back and forth all the time for family parties. And family parties consisted of just a lot of beer and a lot of cigarettes. And it was, that was the norm. The house was filled with cigarette smoke, and there was a kegerator in everybody's house. And it was just, that's how we grew up. If you saw that an adult needed a beer, they would stick their arm out and one of the kids would go fill the beer up. And in the beginning, I never liked beer, and I wanted to know why everybody else at the table liked beer. So eventually I started filling the beer up and then sipping a little off the top of it until I eventually developed a taste for it. And then, so I remember drinking from a very young age, probably, I don't know, probably like 11 or 12. And, it was just a part of life. And, I didn't have a problem with drinking, I think ever, but I think it did lead into bigger things. So, before I get too far with my addiction, I grew up, my family, my mom and dad are still together to this day. I have one younger brother. He's 6 years younger than me. And, we all get along just fine. That, like, our household's good, but it's not it wasn't your typical household. Like, I could say my dad was an awesome dad, but a horrible husband, if that puts things into perspective.
Okay.
It was always, since it was me, my dad, and my brother, it was just every weekend was just guy time. There wasn't really family time. So my mom was often left home by herself to figure out what she wants to do with her day on her own. And we would always be out riding four-wheelers and motorcycles and hunting and fishing. And it was just every weekend, that's what it was. And then, like, when my mom wanted to do something like family oriented, it was like, okay, we got to make her happy and let's do this. But the whole time, my mom, if it wasn't for my mom upheld our whole family dynamic. Like, she did all the inside work, and we got to go play and do guy stuff all the time. So we had a family, a functionable family, but it might not have been a healthily functioning family.
Right.
So eventually that led to, I never got into drugs until after high school, which is different from a lot of my friends who got into drugs in high school and then just totally went full throttle after high school. But I don't think I really started smoking weed until, like, I don't know, maybe like senior year of high school. And then I still was against it. I was like, like,
You were like, hugs, not drugs.
right. Yeah. I was like, drugs are for scumbags. Like, I'm not into that. Like,
For losers.
yeah. And I was in a relationship where she was into drugs and more like just smoking weed and cocaine and stuff like that. And I would buy it for her and I wouldn't even do it. I would just drink. And then what happened was we broke up, and I felt for the first time like alone. And I said, oh, I know how I can get rid of this feeling. I could go buy some drugs, and it worked. And that was when I started getting high, and it just progressed, and I started doing cocaine on the weekends. And so now at this point I'm probably like 21, around that age, in the bar scene, and that progressed and progressed. And then I wound up being sold methamphetamine and was told it was really good cocaine. And to my surprise, it was really good cocaine. And it that led to another probably 7 years of doing meth, and then Percocets. And Percocets are really expensive, and they're they really helped me work. I never got into like just like going to a house and getting high and like just sitting around like staring at the walls. I was always into like I want to be productive. I want more energy. So having that energy and production, it really fed my addiction, because I was like, oh, I can get high and stay up all night and get twice the amount of work done, and it just led to bigger things. And I was a functioning addict for over 10 years. And I guess I never, it took me years to realize that I even had a problem, because I thought that like, oh, I got this. Like I operate heavy equipment for a living. And so I've been doing it for 15 years. I've been in the union, and through my entire addiction, I somehow managed to not hurt anybody or get kicked out of the union, which is totally God thing, because before I even knew God had my back, because it blows my mind that I made it through 15 years without any major accidents.
Yeah.
So
Thank God for that.
yeah. So eventually I ran out of money, and that's when I realized that, hey, I think I might have a problem here. Like I'm making good money for my age, and all my friends are buying houses, and I'm 29 years old. Yeah. Just at home with mom, asking if she's got a couple $100 because I need to make a car payment. And it's like,
So you were still living at home?
still living at home. Yeah. Which, yeah, that enabled me to go do whatever I felt like doing. And
I guess you didn't have to hide what you were doing at home.
I did to my mom, but not so much my dad.
Okay.
Yeah, so that enabled me as well. There was no fear of discipline or anything like that, or I didn't really have to answer to anybody. So my addiction progressed, and I ran out of money, so I couldn't buy Percocets, which were about $30 a pill. And when you want to do 4 pills a day, it just doesn't work for very long. So that turned into heroin's the same thing. It's a lot cheaper. I never got into needles, thank God, but I have sniffed heroin a couple times. But it wasn't my thing, because heroin would bring you down, and I just wanted to keep going up. I just wanted energy. I didn't want to become stupid and out of control, if you will. I didn't want to lose consciousness or fall out or become completely numb to the point that I can't function. So I never got into like downers and stuff like that. But so that was a big eye opener. Like, wow, like here I am, like I'm doing heroin now. Like I think I need to change. And I tried AA, I tried the rooms, I tried changing, and trying to do it man's way and my way failed me every time. I tried doing the 12 steps, and I never fully committed to it. I couldn't. I was under a spiritual bondage, and there was nothing that I could do in my power to change. So, a friend of mine was the girl I was talking to at the time was going to church. She was going to the rooms, and she was pulling people out of the rooms and taking them to church. So I wound up going to church. I went to the Way Out, which is our addiction recovery meeting at the church we go to. And I was in there, and I'm like, man, this is a lot like an AA meeting, but I'm like, there's something different about these people, and I don't know what it is. And I'm like, they have something that I want, but I just don't know what it is. And so I kept going back. I met Joe White, I met Brian Walker there, and
Yeah, that Joe guy.
yeah,
I always keep an eye out on him.
So eventually they invited me to a men's conference, and it was at Calvary Chapel, Philadelphia, which I had never been to, never even heard of. So I went there, and it was this huge church. Let me back up a little bit. I I think I said it earlier. I didn't grow up in a church. I didn't know anything about church life or anything except for like South Philly Catholic. And I was like, this is weird. Like these people, I'm not like this. And I don't think I ever will be. I didn't understand it. I didn't really want to understand it. But so I went to this men's conference and I knew I had a problem. I needed to change. I couldn't change, but I'm like, maybe if I just try this God thing, it'll work. So I went to the men's conference, and that morning I did a line of meth in my bedroom. And I remember hurting so bad
Before
before I went to the men's conference.
so you thought in your mind this would be a really unique experience.
Yeah. The guy I had this I don't know what was going through my mind. I had this thing that was like almost like you can do drugs as long as you do them in moderation and have control with them. And like God will honor that. Like I had this such weird like thing going on in my head. And then come to find out I was under spiritual bondage for sure. So I went to this conference and I remember, so that morning I did the line and I remember it hurting so bad and it felt so wrong for the first time. And I just started crying in my bedroom and I'm just like, what are you doing? Like, what the F are you doing? Like, I remember saying that. And I'm crying and I grabbed the tissue immediately and I just blew it out. And then I had probably like a $50 or $100 bag of meth and I just poured it out in the trash can right in front of me. I'm like, that's it. I'm done. I'm done. I cannot do this anymore. This is not sustainable. And I go to this conference and it was a 1-day men's conference. It started at like 9, I think. And I showed up late like I did everywhere. I was probably got there at 9:45 or something like that. And I get in, I look at the sanctuary and there's like probably like 700 men there. I'm like, this is what a conference is. I'm like, I'm used to like our little sanctuary with like 90 people in it.
Right.
So my mind was blown now, like my heart's racing for multiple reasons. And I remember sitting there and just like being in awe at the worship it blew my mind that like, oh my God, like it was just a room filled with men worshiping in unison. And I realized that, wow, like this is where I belong. Like these aren't just like weird Jesus freaks. I'm like, these are godly men. Like, and that's when it clicked in my head that these are not weirdos that go to church. These men have something that I need so badly and I don't know what it is. So later that day, I don't even remember who was teaching, did an altar call at the end of their sermon. And for the first time, I completely surrendered. I was at the lowest point in my life that like I just gave up. Like for the first time, my heart said, I quit. Like I'm done. I give up. And Joe White was there, Brian, like, and a lot of the other guys from my church. And I was in the pew, and I remember my body started trembling. I started repeating, you know, when they go repeat after me, like, and you'll be saved or something like that. And I don't even remember what I said, but I just remember as soon as I started speaking aloud, like Jesus's name, my chest and my body started trembling. And I started shaking and I was like, oh my God, like my mind realized like, oh my God, it's working. Like he is real. It's like the M&M's commercial and they see Santa Claus. Santa, he is real. And so I like
that commercial.
Yeah. So I'm like, oh my God, it's really working. So I'm like, don't stop. And the more I kept like just repeating what the teacher was saying, the more I started trembling. And then I reached out onto the pew and I'm holding it like this. And I had this death grip, they said, that like I was just digging my wrists and my hands into the pew in the back of the chair. And I just remember it felt like the skin was being peeled off my back. And I'll never forget it. Something was ripped from me that day that I'd been carrying around for I don't know how long, that I picked up along the way somewhere. But from that moment on, I felt I felt like at one point, it was probably like maybe a half hour process of everything that happened. So it felt like the skin was being ripped off my back. And then I remember at one point, it felt like hot wax was being like poured onto the top of my head, like a soft serve ice cream, if you will, kind of like how that's the only way I can describe it. It was so just out of this world that like I can't, words can't describe it. But so that was that experience. I went home. I remember driving home that day, like with 210 on the steering wheel, like this, like just wide eyed. And like, I can't believe what just happened. Like I have like so much changing to do. Like I can't believe he really is real. And I've shunned him my whole life and have blasphemed my whole life. And was like, I'm not into the whole God thing. And I'm not into the whole Jesus thing. Those people are weird. And, here I am. Like, I remember being at that conference and God showed me, he said, look at all these men. He's like, this is your family now. These are your brothers. And that changed my whole perspective on life from then on. That like my whole life, I tried to be a part of something. Like with drugs, I spent time getting hooked up with the wrong crowd, being racist for a long time. And looking back, it was just because I wanted to be a part of something. And it wasn't fueled by my heart by no means, but it's just, I wanted to have fellowship with someone and be a part of something. And God gave that to me when I gave my life to him. So at that point, I feel as though I was not baptized with the Holy Spirit at that point. I feel like I was emptied at that point. I felt like I was freed and the chains were broke at that point. And I spent a good week in true repentance, basically walking around as though I was just a shell of a man. It was like a week of absolutely nothing. That's the best way I could describe it. I just felt like a zombie walking around, and like I had no evil thoughts. I had no desire to use. So there you go. Right there is 10 years of active addiction at the drop of a dime, just done. Like no withdrawing, no like jonesing, no like, oh, I could just do it one more time. There was none of that. So it was about a week of that. And then I remember just trying and expecting to feel some sort of like this joy and this love that everybody's talking about. And I'm like, I don't feel that. And I'm like, I don't know if this is going to work for me. Like, I don't know. And I was in a lot of prayer that week. Like, God, like, please, like, I remember praying, I want to be a son of God. I don't want to be a son of man. Like, that was my prayer. I didn't know what I was praying. I just was using Christianese like I knew what I was talking about.
But it was authentic.
It was authentic.
It went from the heart.
It was from the heart, and God knew exactly what I meant, and more so, he knew exactly what I needed. So I didn't give up. I kept praying, and I remember about a week after the conference, I was in my mother's kitchen, and it had to be like maybe 11 o'clock at night. And it was like the conference was November 13th of 21. And this was like a week after that. So I'm sitting in the kitchen, and on her refrigerator, she has a picture of Jesus with like a sacred heart, and like the sacred heart's got like barbed wire around it, or not barbed wire, thorns rather.
Okay.
And I remember staring into this picture, and I just started crying. And I'm like, if this is what life is, then I don't want to do this. Like, and I've never been suicidal in my life. I never had any thoughts like that. But for the first time in my life, I said, like, if this is what life is going to be, then I want to die. Like, I don't want to live like this. And the second I had that thought, boom, like water started gushing like through my whole body. Not water, but like whatever it was. I was baptized in the Holy Spirit at that very moment. And I started crying and snot's running down my nose, and I'm laughing and giggling, and every void that I had in my body was fulfilled at that very moment. Every feeling that I was trying to create by using drugs was cured at that moment. And I haven't looked back since. Like, it's just from that moment on, I've been sold out for the Lord.
Never looked back.
Yeah.
Which is pretty amazing, because I think about what you were going through and then what you were going through, how in some ways in my mind God orchestrated what was the right thing for the right time for both of you. So, you know, Alyssa, you were dealing with your own pain, right?
Yeah.
Just a little bit different than what Tom was going through. And then he like brought healing, I'm assuming, to both of you guys. So I guess, Alyssa, during this time, obviously you didn't know what was going on.
No.
You probably just were like, who's this dude? I'm assuming you probably heard about like some of the stuff that Tom was dealing with and what have you. So I guess before you guys actually like met, like where were you at? Like, what would you say your heart was at that point in time?
Yeah. So I knew nothing of what he'd been through at this point. I knew him. I knew because I had noticed him. Maybe a month before that, we started talking around the same time that his salvation experience happened. We started having conversations at church, but from a place, I was probably just getting into a place where I felt healed. We'd been at CCSJ for about a year. It was a very safe place for me. Like, just the Lord had done a lot of work in my heart at that time, and I was feeling like I was starting to get plugged into ministry again. It had been about a year since that too, and I remember actually the first year going to CCSJ, I was dating somebody else for a very short period of time, and we walked in the Christmas Eve service, and I saw families coming in with their kids, and I was like, for the first time in my whole life, I'm like, I could see myself doing that, like, but the guy I was with was not the guy I saw myself doing it with. So that ended, and then this all happened with him, and we had started talking. So this is a year later now from that experience I had Christmas Eve, and we had just started talking. And our first,
like literally talking, like
literally
dating,
talking,
just talking,
just having conversations at church. Like, he knew who Jack Johnson was, and that was impressive to me, And there was one night in particular, this is such a stupid little thing.
He was like, I really like the way you play the guitar.
And
I mean, kind of. What's crazy is I've never been the kind of person that, like, I never noticed guys for their looks. Like, I didn't care, because I'd been through enough that I'm like, I don't really care what you look like. You know what I mean? Until I know who you are, you're of no interest to me. But he walked into church one time, and I was sound checking on a Wednesday night on the stage. I remember what he's wearing and everything. He's wearing blue jeans and a black shirt tucked in and a black and white flannel. I think he's just gotten a haircut. He's wearing like work boots. It's so weird. But he walked into church, and like time stopped for a second. I saw him walk in, and I have dated nobody like him previously. So it's not like I had a type or something. Like, I noticed him.
Right.
And then a couple of weeks later, he was sitting in the same pew as me. And this was probably 2 weeks after the experience that he just described. He was sitting in the pew next to me, and we were doing prayer groups at the end of Wednesday night, and he slid over to get into the group, and he opened his flannel a little bit, and he's like, feel this. It's so soft. He's like, I just bought it at TJ Maxx for $12. I'm like, I like this guy. I like this guy a lot.
I just wanted any excuse to talk to her. I'm like, I have to come up with something. It was like a police flannel, and it was like so soft. I'm like, I know this will work.
But what's so cool to me, though, too, it is so funny. It's like Jack Johnson and his TJ Maxx flannel. It's like, I'm sold. But But I think to your point too, just about the timing, what was going on is like I had just gotten to a point of feeling more like just healed and whole again, I guess, and content, and had like a different sense of like kind of what I wanted to do with my time in my life. And I wasn't married to my career anymore. Like a lot of positive things had changed. But what's so cool is we didn't really start having conversations until that happened. It's like God, like you talk about God's timing. It's like, let me just get him to this place first. And then it was only a month after this experience in his mom's kitchen that we started dating. I get her talking. I don't even know what you call it, courting, whatever. Started a relationship. It was
whatever words you used.
Whatever led us to marriage. It was that, It was just a month after that. But God was like, I'm gonna make this happen first, and then you guys will be ready. So it's neat to look back on.
Yeah, oftentimes we don't think about the journey, right? Like in the moment, we're just like, man, God, what's going on? Things feel so overwhelming. And sometimes you feel like just giving up or calling it quits or whatever, But then when you like look back on it after he kind of walks you through the process, the amazing thing about God that I always love and I find fascinating is he goes, remember when, and this is where we are right now. This is where I was trying to get you to. And we sometimes we overlook that, right? Because the pain, the noise is so loud that sometimes it's just like, it's hard to tune it out. But if we just hang in there a little bit longer, like you considered giving up, calling it quits, right? And you probably were like, I'm done with this church thing. I've had enough. But there's just something about what God does. He just knows best. And that's to encourage people that like, if you just hang in there just a little bit, like, man, like I always reference one of my favorite, I don't think it's necessarily a parable. Well, one of my favorite stories is about when Jesus had just finished in Mark. Jesus had just finished feeding the 4,000, I think it says. And he's like, all right, we gotta take a boat. We got to get to the other side. And then, they all hop in the boat and the storm comes, right? And everybody's freaked out. And I love the fact that Jesus was just resting and sleeping in the back of the boat. And, they were like, don't you care? Like, we're going to drown. We're going to die. But it's like, no, like God said that we're going to get to the other side. Jesus said, we're getting to the other side. And he said, why do you have such little faith? Just doubting who his total existence, who he was. And yeah, so like the reason why I kind of like pivoted a little bit is because like you guys' your path was complete opposite.
Yeah.
Two different directions, and the path just brought you guys together. And it's actually encouraging to me that like, wow, like look what God did. Like not everybody has like that recovery story where it's like instantaneous. Maybe God wanted you to be like, hey, check out my really cool flannel. It's not velvet, but like, so that's, to me, that's like really awesome. And in that, how has things just individually, how's that changed? And I guess, Alyssa, I'll start with you and then I'll go to you. Like since that time frame of you guys courting and dating and stuff like that, how has that reconciled maybe some of the challenges that you felt from your own personal experience?
I think I have experienced rest in its truest sense for like literally the first time in life. Like awesome. in all of it, and relationally, spiritually, emotionally, like even physically, honestly. Like I take naps. I mean, like maybe 4 times a year, but I nap now. Like literally, I've experienced rest for the first time in my life. Like my defenses could come down, and it's like I can just feel what I'm feeling and be who I am, and there's safety in it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So in a sentence, that's what's happened for me since we met.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What about you?
I feel like I've learned how to be mindful of not just hers, but other people's feelings, and not just be quick to speak, and really understand where somebody's coming from, and not be so selfish with their way I want to live my life, and really consider other people with my thoughts, my actions. It's like a whole internal thing. It's not just external. It's I feel and realize what's going on inside is so different than I lived the first half of my life. Like I went through not caring about anybody. So,
And now you have people you have to care about.
yeah.
Which is crazy too. It's just funny what God does, because I never would have guessed that that's something that he had to learn based on the way that he is in marriage. You know what I mean? It seems like it's a natural thing. It is crazy. I keep on playing the song in my head, "The Story I'll Tell" by Naomi Rain, where she says I'm actually about to frame this for our daughter's room, but she says, "The hour is dark. It's hard to see what you're doing here in the ruins or where this will lead. Oh, but I know that all through the years, I'll look back on this moment, see your hand on it, and know you were here." And I've like, that's been playing in my head the whole time we're talking, because it's like, looking back, it's like, man, God was in every moment of all of that, right down to the timing.
Yeah, it definitely has encouraged me. I'm inspired. Yeah, I'm done.
Now, please don't do that.
I'm inspired by you guys, like, kind of just sharing it, because like you don't really know people until you really take time to get to know them. So it's always good to, like, like, you're people that I fellowship with, so I always want to get to know those people, and I'm very selective who I let into my circle, because I don't want to waste time, and I want to be very selective and caring about who I let in. So, like, you guys are a part of my family, because most of my family's gone, with the exception of a few people, aunts and uncles. But yeah, it's I look forward to serving in ministry with you guys, because I just believe that the best for you guys, your lives, is really ahead of you, and I'm excited to be, just even if it's a small part of that. So what are some things that you guys are, like, just like really in this season, just really passionate about, and what are some things that maybe you want to do futuristically? Obviously, I didn't bring it up, but you mentioned it. Like, you guys have a family on the way. You have a daughter that's on the way, so, which is very exciting. You're in for a treat, being a dad with a daughter. So, what are some things you're doing now and you want to do futurely, and just like your passion?
Yeah, I want to make sure that I say that coming into this marriage, I was totally not, I don't want to say totally against, but thought that I was above reproach when it comes to counseling and bettering myself. I was like, yeah, I'm like, you only need counseling if you're like
Messed up.
or like have seen some really ugly things. And like, I'm like, I can handle myself. I got this. Like, I don't need counseling. And by far the best thing I've done for our marriage is seek counsel, for sure. And I never thought that I'd be saying that. I thought that counseling was for the weak, and I felt as though I was strong and I didn't need it. I'm like, I got God, and I got the great and mighty counselor. I don't need counsel from man. And we started, as a protective measure, going to marriage counseling within the first year of our marriage. And I don't know, it had to be from God, and
It was his idea
it
too.
was my idea,
Yeah.
which surprised her.
I fell a little more in love with him when he said,
So I wanted to plant hedges around our marriage. I've heard so many horror stories, and we both grew up in a household where it was not a healthy marriage.
Yeah.
And my family probably should have or could have ended up in divorce, and hers did over it. So I didn't want our marriage to look anything like the only thing we know of marriage. Like, so we went to marriage counseling, a Christian marriage counselor, which I highly suggest, not going secular when it comes to that stuff. So we were able to apply biblical principles and just examine ourselves. And our first year of marriage, we had some struggles that we had to get through because of things that I brought into it and things that I would say you brought into it as well, that we knew we did, but didn't really we didn't know how to attack it, I guess. And we definitely came out on top after going through marriage counseling and know where we lack awareness in ourselves of certain things that we do. And now we have that awareness, and it's so awesome to see the fruit of that a situation that would have led to an argument now is like, all right, let's take a breath and
and we verbally acknowledge it. Yeah. We kind of laugh about it. It's like, a year ago we would be fighting over this.
Yeah. Throwing pillows at each other and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's I definitely, I forget what the beginning of the question was, but
if I could finish it, I think collectively as a couple, one of the things that we see in the future, I'll come back to what we're doing right now, but in the future is I would just love the opportunity to be able to speak into younger marriages once we become more experienced in marriage. That's the passion that I know that I have, and I know that he shares with me, is in helping bolster families, like marriages and families, specifically within the Christian community, because sometimes I think the above reproach mindset is not rare, I don't think. So that's something that we see for ourselves, because we see what the Lord's done in us individually, how he brought us together, and then what he's done in just under 2 years of marriage. I mean, our marriage looks nothing today like it did even 6-8 months ago, because of what the Lord's done, because of counseling, because of just being people that are willing to work on ourselves. So that is a big part of what I see for us in the future. I know currently for myself, one thing that just the topic of discipleship is something that I care deeply about. I think we're both involved in youth ministry right now at the church. And so that age group where they're deciding if they're going to do this Jesus thing, having the opportunity to pour into lives and be like, this is not just a church thing, this is a life-changing, this can be a life-changing thing if you let it for yourself, and figuring out how to walk alongside of them in that as we do the ministry. That's a big part of what we're doing right now, in addition to worship leading, and then just taking all these things that we've learned and building a foundation for our family. We're 2.5 months from having our first child, and are in a healthy marriage and a healthy family, and prioritizing home first. That's something we've been really intentional about. Is ministry matters a lot, and there's things that God's called us to, but God's called us to focus on home first. So we've been really intentional over the last year of building that kind of environment for our family.
Well, that's awesome. So is there anything that you guys really have a passion for? I guess the counseling, anything else short term, and then long term? I guess maybe you covered the long term a little bit, is the counseling aspect. And I mean, that might be a short midterm as well. So any music, writing, anything?
Well, we both do worship at our church, and being able to do that with my wife is something I never thought that I would ever do in my life. I learned how to play drums in elementary school, and then I played up until middle school, and then that was pretty much it. I walked away from it. I found drugs, and I just didn't care to play drums anymore. And with this church, I started playing drums, and then now we play together. So I guess that's looking in the future. We would like to do make music together.
Music, and even I write a lot of spoken word, and doing the music beds for that is something that we've done a little bit of, actually, on an acoustic level.
Yeah.
We didn't know we were doing it at the time, but I pulled a recording that we had and used it for the backtrack of poetry. But that would be really neat. And then from a writing perspective too, with deck devotionals, I want to be more consistent with that and have short study series, and I just have more time to write. It's so important.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to mention the deck devotionals in case anybody wants to follow that. They can go to it's at deck devotionals on Instagram.
Yeah.
Okay, I was trying to remember. Yeah, my brain can only hold so much stuff. So
Yeah.
well, thank you guys seriously for hanging out with me. Hopefully this is the last time that we can get together and just chat, because there's I plan on doing like a whole thing on church hurt, because I think people need to kind of find their way through that process, because it can be a lonely one sometimes, because you can kind of feel like there's some things that are going on that I don't feel comfortable with, and how do I manage that, and how do I navigate through that? So would love to have that discussion, and amongst other things, we're diving into all kinds of other things when we get together to fellowship. So thank you guys again so much, and thanks everyone for joining us. Hopefully you were inspired by this awesome power couple and their story. So until next time, see you guys.